This is Asus's PG259QNR, and you do not need this. But damn is it cool. Its main selling point is its 360Hz refresh rate. Yes, you heard that right, 240Hz is old news. Its other main highlight reel point is in its name, the R, which stands for Reflex Latency Analyser. That lets you plug in a mouse into this and track your latency from your mouse click all the way to a gun firing in-game on screen. But what's this monster of a thing actually like to play on? We have to start with that monster of a refresh rate. Now, I've said it plenty of times in the past that I don't really care for 240Hz monitors. I know that technically speaking they are better, but I've tested plenty of them and I've never been able to tell a difference or feel a difference, perceive it, or even as I've tested, actually get any in-game performance advantage by using one instead. But this though? This is different. I can't really explain why, but this feels like I'm looking through a window into the game rather than playing on a display. It is ridiculously nice to play on. Of course, you do have to be playing at least 360 FPS to get the full benefit, which means you're going to be stuck playing games like CSGO and Valorant, but that's pretty much the target market for a monitor like this anyway, so it fits pretty well. Playing on this felt like it was easier to hit shots more quickly and react to enemies, whether that's them popping out from behind cover or me coming around a corner and then immediately noticing someone a little bit faster than I normally would. Don't get me wrong, I'm still awful at CSGO, but I was definitely better. I felt more confident in hitting shots, and I definitely hit more shots more often than I would without this insane refresh rate. On the note of actually feeling a difference, I've got a theory on that. Now, the trouble with going with higher and higher refresh rates is that you run into the law of diminishing returns. Hertz is cycles per second, or in this case, frames drawn per second, and the more frames you draw in a second, the less time difference there is between each of those frames, aka the frame times are less and less different, essentially. Put it this way, a 60Hz monitor draws a new frame every 16.67 milliseconds. A 144Hz display draws a new frame just every 6.9 milliseconds. That's almost 10 milliseconds difference, and that makes it really easy to tell. It makes it a lot smoother. You're seeing well over double the number of frames per second, and again, because of that frame time difference, and it's such a big gap, it's really easy to notice. But then when you move from a 140Hz display up to 240, well, 240Hz is displaying a frame every 4.2 milliseconds, roughly, which isn't that much faster than at 144Hz. I mean, technically speaking, you are still seeing almost double the frames in that same time frame, but you're going from 6.9 milliseconds to 4.2, a gap of only, what, 2-3 milliseconds? And that's not massive. And at 360Hz, each frame is only on screen for 2.8 milliseconds. One, that's absolutely insane, but two, if you compare that to 240Hz, that's really not much faster at all. Only 1.4 milliseconds faster per frame. But the thing is, I don't use a 240Hz display. I use a 144Hz one on the regular, it's my daily driver, and it's what I use to test most of the things that you see on this channel. So if I'm accustomed to frame times of 6.9 milliseconds, jumping to 2.8, well, that's a much more sizable gap and a bit more noticeable. Now, it's all well and good having an insanely fast refresh rate, but if the panel itself can't keep up, it's pretty much pointless. Luckily, the AU Optronics panel that Asus are using here is absolutely insane. Not only is it an IPS panel, but even on the normal overdrive setting, which is the sort of first one after off, this was reporting just 3 milliseconds of black to white response times, which is one of the fastest that I've seen. Now, the white to black response time, the one that can't be affected by overdrive, that's a bit slower at around 6 milliseconds, but even then, it only has around 1 frame of ghosting on the UFO test, and trailing edge as you would expect, and that's really impressive. Now, I do not recommend setting overdrive to extreme because you will get a lot of inverse ghosting and haloing. Don't do it, but on the normal setting, you get decent response times going from darker to lighter, and it's still not too bad on the trailing edge, so you really don't notice ghosting at all. I should also mention that the image, once it is still, is actually fairly sharp. Now, you can improve that by using the ultra low motion blur setting in the menu, but personally I wouldn't, because you have to not only disable G-Sync, but you can also only run at 240Hz with that enabled, and that kind of defeats the purpose. Input lag is also something that's important to check, as it can drastically affect your experience. But there's good news. My Time Sleuth reported just 1.2 milliseconds of input lag at the top of the display, which, while technically isn't the fastest I've ever seen, is also a very good result. Taking a look at the total system input lag using NVIDIA's LDAT tool, that was sitting at around 26 milliseconds on average, specifically with G-Sync enabled in the G-Sync esports mode, as that was the fastest by a reasonable amount. The end result of all of that is a gaming experience that's like no other. I genuinely was blown away when playing on this, and almost felt frustrated that I'm not an esports pro because I know that I'm not getting the most out of this monitor. But that's kind of the point. That is who should be using this. Esports pros, CSGO and Valorant teams who are competing at the very top level. The average gamer like you and me really don't need this, and unless you've got money to burn, it's probably almost wasted on you. And honestly, the other headline feature of this model, the Reflex Latency Analyser, kind of solidifies that point. Now, in theory, this is a really cool tool. It's basically NVIDIA's LDAT tool built into the monitor, and like I said at the start, you plug in a mouse to the red USB ports, plug in your downlink cable to your PC, and then enable it in the menu, and you're all set. In theory. In practice, it was pretty finicky to get working. Now, I'm using technically an unsupported mouse. It is the Razer Viper 8K the 8000 Hz polling rate mouse, although I did set it to 1000 Hz for my testing here, and I was using CSGO, which doesn't have overly bright muzzle flashes, which is what this relies on. What this does is capture the mouse input when it receives it at the USB port, and then effectively starts a timer until it then gets a frame and detects on screen that there has been a muzzle flash in the detection window. Now, you can enable visibility on that detection window to move it around and to position it. Also, you can change the sensitivity, which I had to do set to high on CSGO because otherwise it would only detect, well, it wouldn't detect, and even with it set to high, it would only detect around 1 in 5 shots if you're standing still, or refuse to if you are moving. It seems like a really cool feature and a really useful tool for those esports pros to dial in their settings to get the best experience and the lowest input lag possible. But again, for the average gamer, this isn't a feature that you really need or can make use of. If you're not good enough to benefit from 1 or 2 extra milliseconds of lower input lag, then why bother paying the extra? The rest of the monitor is pretty good. Color accuracy, as you might expect, does take a bit of a hit, only covering 94% of the sRGB spectrum and having a peak brightness of 400 nits, but again, for the target market for this, that's fine. The colors do look good to the eye though, so content consumption is certainly viable and it's versatile enough. Also, speaking of versatility, the stand is pretty good. You've got a full suite of adjustments, including height, tilt, swivel, and rotation, and it even comes with a C-clamp desk mount if you'd rather not use the rather wide footprint base. You do, of course, have some RGB on the back, although it is pretty muted and subtle, so it won't be a distraction if you've got your monitor up against a wall. And you do only have relatively limited inputs, just 1 HDMI port and 1 display port. I should also mention though that Asus in their design of this has decided to put a lip on the backside of the monitor under the I/O, which means that it's very difficult to get your display cables in, and it tries to almost snap the connectors off by just having the cables plugged in. It's not a nice experience, and I really wish this lip was removed or at very least brought forward a bit so that it doesn't try to snap my display cable every time I plug it in. Of course, all of that luxury comes at a luxury price. £800. That is a lot to spend on a 1080p monitor, admittedly one of the best 1080p monitors money can buy, but that price tag puts it squarely in the eyes of professionals and people with too much money to burn. But wait, there's good news! I have one simple trick to help you save £100 on this monitor. Buy the PG259QN instead. That is the exact same monitor, but it doesn't have the NVIDIA Reflex Latency Analyser, which if you're not an esports pro, you definitely don't need. And even if you are an esports pro, it's probably a good idea to buy one of these QNRs to help dial in your settings, but fit the rest of the team with the standard QNs instead. So, conclusion time. This is one of the best gaming experiences I've ever had for fast-paced FPS games. It made me a marginally better player, at least in terms of my accuracy and reaction times, and it is a phenomenal experience to play on. Would I spend my own £700 or £800 to buy one? Definitely not. I am not a good enough player to make anywhere near enough use of this to justify that price tag, and even if you're also not, but you're willing to spend that kind of money, you should also know that you can spend the same money on an Aorus FI27Q-X, which is a 1440p 240Hz IPS monitor, which is probably going to be a better overall package and experience for you than this is. If you are an esports pro or a team who are looking to upgrade your monitors, this is fantastic. The versatility and the sheer performance of it is incredible, and you will see an advantage in games. But for the rest of us, this is cool, but unless you have the money to spare, I wouldn't be too worried about not having one of these sitting on your desk. So that is my thoughts. I would love to hear yours in the comments down below. What do you think of this monster of a monitor? Is this your next option, or are you gonna stick with the more standard 1440p or even 1080p options instead, maybe something a little bit more budget friendly? Feel free to let me know in the comments down below. I will be leaving a link to this in the description down below if you want to check it out. That'll be an Amazon affiliate link that will take you to your local Amazon store, where you can see pricing when and where you watch this, because it can and does vary. There are also a whole load of other links in the description you can check out, from merch or hoodies or t-shirts like this one. This is in my At The Wheel merch. Also check out the At The Wheel channel if you're interested in cars, but there's also some TechteamGB ones if you're interested. There's also other links for places like Overclock UK if you buy from there, VPN options, Humble Bundle, Streamlabs OBS, a load of stuff. Feel free to check it out. And there'll be plenty of other videos on the end cards, maybe the FI27Q-X review if you're interested in seeing that one. Otherwise, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, do feel free to leave those in the comments down below, and we'll see you on the next video.